I have been extremely fortunate to have worked for hundreds and hundreds of companies in the Agile sphere, everything from Scrum to large-scale Agile, and I really just want to try and share some of the experiences that I've got and that I've come across. Now, I'm going to leave about 15 minutes at the end for questions and answers, and you might have many, you might have different experiences and a different journey, and that's what I quite like from these sessions. So I'm just going to give you my view tonight, and hopefully you can either challenge it or take something from it, okay? Now, if anybody's got any really, really desperate questions, feel free to chip in. Otherwise, I'll take all the questions at the end, and I'll start going through this. If you want to use the hashtag there, #distributed agile, if you want to do that, feel free. Pretty new to this hashtag stuff. We did a webinar recently, and this is completely true. This was only a couple of weeks ago, and it was on the Moscow prioritization technique. And we thought, Moscow, yeah, there's must have, should have, could have. We thought, let's use the hashtag Moscow. Not a good move, but we spotted that. We're not that dim. So instead, we used the hashtag must-haves. Has anyone heard of that hashtag at all? Well, not wishing to stereotype at all, but apparently a lot of women use that hashtag to see what is the next hot thing to buy when they're shopping. So this is a massive hashtag for people looking at handbags and shoes. And of course, our hashtag didn't quite work there. So we're adapting, inspecting and adapting, and we've decided to go careful and check our hashtag before we use it. I can't imagine that many people are using distributed agile for anything other than distributed agile. Anyway, let's get going. Presentation's pretty straightforward. I'm going to talk you through the 8 ways. And as I say, trying to give you food for thought, and we'll take questions at the end. I just want to start with actually the word distributed. I think one of the biggest things that's happened to me recently is in what triggered this actual presentation was a trip out to India, and I spent 3 weeks out there working with a well-known bank, and I was just looking at various things and helping them with distributed agile. That was the brief I was given. And the thing that struck me was a few things started to come home that even though 3 decades, let's play that down a little bit, but even after 3 decades of agile, I was still learning, and a couple of things really came to me, almost sort of epiphanal moments, and that's what I want to share with you tonight. And one of those is about the definition of distributed. We'll then go through the 8 ways, and one thing I'll promise you is we'll go very light on the commercials. I know what it's like sitting there, and you don't want 5 minutes from me telling you all about KRC, so I'm going to be very, very sparing on that. And the good reason for that is actually Saeed has just done it for me. The only thing I do want to dwell on there really is it's sort of agile at scale. It isn't just Scrum, it's everything in terms of all things agile, particularly strong in the Prince arena. If you go back to 2004, 2005, 2006, it was Prince or Agile. And I never ever understood that, and I spent, if you like, a lonely journey to say, hang on, these two things are, these help each other, so let's not see them as a sort of friend and foe. And I think, now, admittedly it's 2014, but I think that penny has started to drop, and people are saying that, yeah, Prince is actually good news for Agile, certainly Agile at scale. One quick thing about the book, that was written using Agile techniques, and it's a very interesting situation to find yourself in when you've got to write a book and deliver it on time for TSO. And I thought to myself, what excuse can I give about a book that is all about being on time? What excuse can I give for being late? You suddenly realise you've got nowhere to go. And I think a lot of people work in an agile way because you've just got no other option. Now, the first thing I want to do is really just get this word distributed out there and really not necessarily debunk any myths, but just try and give you an idea that this idea of distributed normally brings some idea of, well, it's UK and India, or it's global. We're talking continents. We're talking time zones. But the truth is that really, if someone's on the floor above, you could say you're distributed. And this is what I've been noticing with a lot of work, the fact that, in fact, my favourite one was working for one of the big banks in Ireland. There was several offices, this is in Dublin, several offices in Dublin, and 2 of the offices were actually opposite each other, across the road, across a straightforward, 2-lane road, not a motorway or anything. And I remember talking to the people there, and they were saying things like, and they were almost proud that they'd never crossed the road for about 2.5 years. Now, not only had they not actually crossed the road, being on floor 2, but they hadn't actually gone up to floor 3 either. Now, if you're sort of from here in London to, say, over in Chennai in India, you know, you seem to make an effort and realise there's a problem there. But the thing that dawned on me, and this is what's been dawning on me for a while now, is to an extent are we not all distributed in some form? Now just remember that a lot of what's written about Agile, and I mean sort of 80–90%, assumes some sort of collocation. It assumes it's a small team, we're all in the same room, you know, the product owner is to hand, it's all lovely, but how many times is that typical? And I would suggest to you that's actually quite rare. So when we talk about distributed, you know, different floors are distributed to some extent. Different office, different city. One of my best customers at the moment is a big law firm. They got offices in Yorkshire and in London. They got 4 or 5 offices in London, and they got 1 in the States. And you know, having 4 offices in London is distributed. And as I say, sometimes if you find one of the offices is in Chennai, you might make a bit of an effort. If it's, you know, if it's 2 stops on the tube, maybe I'll give them an email. So different country, different continent, different time zone, offshore, nearshore. You know, have you heard this lovely expression, nearshore? Has anyone heard nearshore? I'm thinking, is that better than offshore? Or, well, it's nearer, isn't it? Well, Ireland is nearshore, but you know, I'm dealing with people in places like Eastern Europe, and are they offshore or nearshore or far shore? Or, and that's what I'm saying. What about this concept called not shore? Now, I know you've all come here to listen to the 8 Ways, and one of my biggest findings, and I know I'm going to be a bit controversial with this, but I'm really sort of pleased, if you like, to have uncovered this, in my opinion, and I'm happy to discuss this later. But if you had to think of one word about what the #1 problem is when you're working distributed, be it India, be it Latvia, be it Ireland, in a word, what do you think the biggest single problem is? Loads of people say communication. Now, before I went to India on my last trip, I would have agreed with you. But this is the big news from the presentation. That is not the #1 problem, okay? The #1 problem is actually teamwork and collaboration. Now, I know you've sort of turned up in your spare time of the evening thinking, I didn't come here for you to tell me I'm wrong. Just bear with me for 5 minutes and I'll explain where I'm going with this. Because what I've found, and with all the work that I've done in terms of different situations, and this includes, you know, America, Norway, Europe, India, all these places, I'm finding that actually, what actually is the most important thing to get right when you've got teams in different places are these sort of 2 areas here. So we got, firstly, the idea of the culture, or how collaborative the culture is. And what I'm saying is, you know, are we all working together? Or is it a little bit like us and them, or is it a little bit like silos, okay? Now, this is where it gets complicated, and I don't want to get too mathematical here, but what I'm talking about is, firstly, you need to look within each team as to whether you've got a collaborative culture, whether you've got a sort of a sequential way of working, if you like, waterfall. So let me take an example of, say, the UK team. Let me just use a standard example of UK and India. If you've got a team in the UK, what is their culture? Are they very much siloed? You know, the business analyst hands things to a designer, hands it to a developer, hands it to a tester. So in other words, we've got a sequential way of working, but is it a collaborative or is it adversarial? And by collaborative, are we all working together? Are we one team? Is there no sort of fiefdoms and silos? And by way of working, I mean, are we in a highly iterative and incremental or agile way of working, or is it really a serial, sequential way of working, and we're just going down a line of a sort of waterfall? And be careful here, because I've been doing this for a long time, 3 decades. I've been doing this a long time, and a lot of people mistake iterative and incremental for what I call phased waterfall. Just because you're doing 2 deliveries, you know, don't think, hey, we're agile. Because if it just looks like 2 waterfalls, then really you're just doing phased waterfall. So look at your team in the UK and look at your team in India and say to yourself, two questions. One is, what is the culture like? And secondly, what is the prevailing way of working? And when I say prevailing way of working, I'm meaning, is it iterative and incremental? Namely, short deliveries, time boxing, and you're happy to go around. You see lots of loops everywhere. Or is it very sequential and very linear? Now, the next thing then is, what about between the teams? So let's say take UK to India. Now, I've been out to India with about 3 or 4 companies now, so I'm not going to give any names, but sometimes I'm out there and I realise, actually, the relationship isn't good. The relationship is fundamentally, what are they doing? And, what are they saying to us? Well, we can't work with this. And I'm listening to this. There's no collaboration. It's really an us and them, and it's a battle. And sometimes it's UK's fault, and sometimes it's India's fault. But it's a battle. So what I'm trying to sort of get across there is that when we talk about distributed working, we've got the team in the UK, we've got the team in India, and we've got, if you like, the intra-team way of working. Now, if any one of those is failing, you've got a problem. Because in effect, you've got to get them all working. Now, again, I don't want to get too mathematical here, but if you take a really simple example of, 5, 6, 8 people in the UK, and 5, 6, 7, 8, 10, 15 people in India, you've got a straightforward, what I call a 3x2 grid. So let me tell you what the 3 is. You've got the UK side, you've got the India side, and you've got the connection between the 2. Those are, if you like, the 3 teams that have to work. But you've also got double the trouble, because have we got collaboration working, and have we got waterfall, or have we got iterative and incremental? And you've in effect got to get all of those right. And it's a little bit like a bottleneck. The single point of failure out of those, if you like, 6 options is going to be your narrowest point. Now, I'm only speaking from experiences. This isn't theoretical. I've seen a highly collaborative team out in India, highly collaborative team out in the UK, and I've seen the bottleneck between. I've also seen a very collaborative team in India, and I've also seen an incredibly dysfunctional team in the UK. Very much command and control, very much coding factory, Chinese restaurant style of working. And, the Indians were fully agile, fully collaborative. Never seen so many people standing up talking to each other around PCs. Yet the stuff coming across, it was very sequential, very linear. Now, sorry about the heavy maths, but what I'm saying is, yeah, we're collaborative. It doesn't work that way. You've got to look at the 3 areas, and you've got to look at, as I say, is it agile that's happening there, and is it collaboration? Now, there's also things what I call trust. I mean, there's a classic example of the classic stereotype. And as I say, on my trips to India, one of the most exciting things I've had recently is being able to take this head on. And it is this stereotype that that Indians always say yes. You say, how's it going? Is it going okay? Yes. And the answer always comes back, yes. Now, it's been fantastic fun for me, certainly in recent times, to actually, talk to people out in India, places like, Chennai, Pune, wherever, and saying, where does this all come from? And it's quite fascinating to listen to the other side of the coin. The truth is, a lot of the times, they're actually saying no. And when this goes up to maybe their team leaders, the team leaders feel sort of duty-bound to say yes. It almost seems like a cultural thing to say yes. But I often use the example of what I find in restaurants. I've sat next to a table of people at a restaurant in the UK, and they're complaining about the rice. The rice is a bit stodgy. Like, oh, God, they've overcooked the rice, haven't they? Oh, this is terrible. Then the waiter comes over and says, is everything all right with your meal? And what do you think the standard British response to that is? Yes, yeah, it's fine. It's lovely, lovely. Absolutely love it. So, let's be careful here. This culture, this stereotype is a very simple and I think a naive hook to hang things on. We all have different cultures. Trust me, if you've got a very strong command and control structure in the UK and somebody says, how's it going? You're going to get yes. So let's go careful here with this, with some of the, if you like, the stereotyping and the default. And I'll explain a little bit more about this later on. One thing I'm happy to share with you, and this is because we had such a good time out with one group in India, was the fact they did sort of confess to, yeah, we're not brilliant at saying no. So I spent quite a bit of time sort of training and consulting with them to say, how about using the word not sure? or maybe. And they quite liked this. They thought this was quite good. So because the distributed training was taking place in both UK and India, I was then able to train all the sort of UK side to say, if you hear the words not sure, you know, this means no. And we can actually play around with this. And this was actually quite good fun. And you know, the Indians got the hang of this pretty quick, because as soon as you're saying, is that okay? You know, can you deal with that? And they're going, well, I'm not sure. So they understood what their side of the deal was. So more about that in a moment. So what's number two? What's the second most important thing to get right? Well, for those that didn't leave when they said communication, I do believe that communication is actually a very big factor and a very important thing to get right. I just don't think it's the biggest. Trust me, the point I've just been making about point number one, about collaboration and teamwork, that's the big one to get sorted. I wouldn't invest, you know, if I had 50k to invest in something, I'd invest it in the teamwork and collaboration as opposed to investing it in things like Skype or something like that. But communication is big. It's not minor, it's not small fry. It is one of the things to get right. So we all know it's a problem, so you're right to say communication, those that did, and those that didn't go home, so that's good news. But an important thing I would say is that you've got to attack this situation. You've got to say, hang on, I know communication's a problem, so let's throw a load of things at it. Let's throw Skype at it. Let's throw WebEx, video conferencing, or whatever. Has anybody in the room here got anything like telepresence by any chance? Has anyone seen telepresence? Right, only about 5, maybe 10% of the room there. I think in about 5 years, 10 years' time, we'll all be doing it, but it's almost life-size video. It's a bit scary, to be honest, but it's as near as you can get to, you know, not actually flying out there. But communication is a big thing. So attack it, whatever it takes. What collaboration software have you got? What videos you've got? One of the big companies I work with in terms of the international side just wouldn't have any video due to security problems. And I said, well, how can you be agile distributed with no video whatsoever? And they're going, it's a good point. So they invested time. And even a one-to-one on a webcam is 10 times better, 25 times better than an email. So attack that situation. Go for it with the communication side of things. But remember that face-to-face is, at the end of the day, the best way to interact. There's just no substitute for it. There's a lot of statistics on the internet about, you know, 7% of meaning is conveyed by words. A lot of misunderstanding about how that statistic is used. But the fact is, an email can be quite narrow in terms of how much information it passes around, whereas face-to-face is extremely powerful. Even a phone call is better than an email. Now, I just want to try something here with you. How many people in the room, and you don't put your hand up if you don't want to, but how many people in the room here have sent an email to someone, it's caused offence, but you didn't actually mean to cause offence? Has anyone had that problem at all? Right, I'd say that that's half the room. Some people are thinking, I actually meant to cause offence on that email, so I'm not going to count myself. Now, any idea why that happens? I mean, any ideas? Why have you caused offence on an email? Right, you've got no tone of voice, no language, no intonation. And what do we do to compensate for this? Smileys, the smiley faces, okay? Now, another question for you. How many people here in a business context, not with your friends, but in a business context, how many people here use smileys in a business context, even to a customer? Right, half the room. Now, the other half of the room are sitting there going, bit weird. Unprofessional is probably the word most, a lot of people nodding and laughing. It's the most common answer I get, unprofessional. The trouble is, though, at least if you sit there and say to someone, you're a total idiot, and it's got a smiley face at the end, it's a little bit easier to handle at the other end than if you're trying to joke without the smiley face. Now, there's a dark side here. For a long time, I've often known that email is very, very restrictive and narrow in terms of trying to get the information across. And remember, if we're talking the standard model, and it could be any country, anywhere, but if we take UK to India, and we're just pumping emails around, I call this a very narrow band of communication. But I think it's far worse. Only happened to me really in the last 18 months that I've been dealing with various teams. And the email problem, I think, is bigger than we realise. Now, again, don't put your hand up if you don't want to, but is there anyone in the room here that, because of email, and because of the team they're in, they've actually felt, you know, really, you know, the blood's boiling, really hacked off, almost thinking about leaving, really emotionally hit just because of email. Anybody in the room that's ringing a bell with at all? Right, there's a few. Now, this is why I'm saying that actually email, because it's got no tone, it's got no body language, it's got no context, it can be a very sort of damaging thing. And if your communication between, say, the UK and India is primarily email, you know, it can be quite damaging. My wife is watching something on the internet at the moment, and it involves a couple of barn owls. Okay, they've got a webcam in a bird box with a couple of barn owls, and for about the last 3 months, these barn owls have had eggs. They've had about 7 eggs. They've had 7 baby owls. In fact, they're called owlets. And these things have grown, and the amount of traffic and information going underneath it with people commenting is quite amazing about how much people are enjoying it. Sorry to say this, but there's some not so good bits here. You know, some of the young don't survive, and there's a lot of comments going underneath. But it's even watching something like owls in a bird box. The amount of anger and anguish in the text underneath is really quite shocking. You know, some people saying, "Get a grip, this is only nature," and people being quite upset. And this is just text. Face to face, those people just wouldn't have an issue at all. So what I'm saying with the communication is, you know, attack it, look after it, simulate it as best you can. I think video conferencing has come on a lot in the last sort of 10 years. Go back 10 years. Do you remember those sort of screens where there were like 3 versions of you in different colours and you couldn't quite work out who was what? So again, try and go after this. But reduce the amount of written word. Reduce the emails. Reduce the documents. But the key word is reduce. You cannot get rid of them. You know, you cannot avoid it. But can we replace it with things like visuals, diagrams, as I say, things like the webcams and such like. Phone is better than documents and better than email. Go visual. But here's the big one, is at what time do we bite the bullet and travel? On my last visit out to India, which was very recently, I happened to meet 3 people out there that I'd met 2 years previously. And I didn't know I was going to meet them. They'd moved, one had moved from a different company and moved to another place. And it was just like meeting an old friend. It was just the bond was there, the engagement was there, and this is why it just takes away that sort of very sterile email document-driven approach. Now, I'm not saying fly everyone everywhere. All I'm trying to say is, you know, have a little think. That's what I'm saying about the 50K. If I had 50K, would I try and bring either the business analysts out to India or bring the developers over to the UK just to try and create that bond, to try and make the communication a load easier? So point number 2 there is really, yes, communication, but attack it like crazy. Now, golden rule number 3, if you like, or one of the ways to get your distributed working better, is what I call getting to ping pong. One of the biggest problems with distributed is what I call the coding factory model. How many people, just put your hands up if you've heard of this thing called water scrum fall. Anybody heard of water scrum fall being mentioned? Okay. Now, about 1/3 of you. Now, my advice to you is run a mile as a default. Just run a mile. Now, if you've got the good bits of waterfall and the good bits of scrum clipped in carefully, it might work. And it could work, but just the general concept that we do a bit of serial stuff, we then do delivery, and they then tidy up the loose ends at the end. And I've seen the diagrams of people espousing water scrum fall, and it certainly doesn't work for me. Because one of the problems I see with distributed is what I call the coding factory model, where it's a bit like a Chinese restaurant, where you send out a spec, just like saying, I want a number 36 and a 48, and the hatch opens, and back comes the meal. What you need to do is really try and get into a more interactive way of working if you're offshore, nearshore, or whatever. Try and get a bit of back and forward, because it's the technical side, if you like, for example, India. And when you go out to India, you know, I personally am blown away by the sheer ability and professionalism of the people out there. They can add a lot to the party, but we need a bit of back and forth. If we just say code that up, it's not gonna work. So this idea of interaction and back and forward means that the people solving the problem can give you options. As opposed to you saying, put this on a screen here, etc., you can actually engage and get a bit of back and forth. The techies, if you like, hold the key to what is possible. Now, I know I'm giving an IT example here, but it applies to anything. Engineering, you could be creating whatever, printed circuit boards, it doesn't matter. If you're outsourcing or offshoring anything, the techies can solve it various ways, but they've got to know what the problem is. You can't just sort of say, hey, build this one, please. You do need to avoid long rallies. When I say ping pong and back and forward, I'm saying do it a few times. If it's happening 8, 9, 15, 20 times over, one piece of functionality or one feature, that sounds something more fundamental's gone wrong there. But as I say, and when you're doing this ping pong, get used to expressions like some of the things on the screen there. I'm not sure, what about this, what are you trying to achieve? Get the discussion going, move it away from this binary yes, no. One of the problems with this is if you ask a closed question, is everything okay, do you understand that? You're going to get a yes, no answer. Having said that, if you go for more, can you play back to me what you think I'm saying here? You get an interaction and you get some clearer understanding of what's going on. But if we start moving things between, say, UK and India a few times, you get an idea, you get some evidence, you get something to look at. It's either a good one or it's a bad one. I mean, a very simple example is something that's just been happening recently at KRC. We're trying to create some new forms of something, and we're just going through a series of artwork, back and forward 3 times. Yeah, that's okay. Can you change this? Okay. And if it's going 15 or 20 times, there's something, something a bit more complicated there. But the thing that's missing that I find a lot with distributed is this concept which I call a two-way street. Be it India, be it Ireland, it doesn't really matter, be it Yorkshire. The fact is, the technical side can add a lot to what you're trying to do. If we take an IT example about what's the art of the possible with things like apps, you might find that Indians know a lot more about, how an app can work because they're playing around with them all the time. Whereas, if you're a business analyst and you're not quite used to that sort of stuff, it's not so simple. So this idea of ping pong, back and forward, validation, get into this idea of back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And if you keep that regular and frequent, you're going to get a more accurate solution. In linking with that, and this is again what I'm finding, this isn't just ideas I've come up with, I've sort of tried to see what works and what doesn't, but this idea of creating frequent deliveries with the back and forth and the ping pong gives you a sort of comfort feeling or a control feeling of, and I always refer to it as you can run, but you can't hide. So if we're going back and forward, but we've got a regular cadence of deliveries, we create several, if you like, frequent moments of truth. So this is where your time boxing or your sprints with Scrum of, say, 2 weeks or 3 or 4, if we're delivering something tangible every 2 weeks, we've got this big moment whether we can find out whether what we're told has been true or not. So, for example, if somebody's always saying, yeah, it's fine, it's fine, it's fine, it's fine, you are always at a maximum 10 days away from a moment when you deliver and you can go, well, let's have a look at what we got. But creating these little moments of truth, and I don't really mean wait for the 2 weeks. I'm saying if you could get it as frequently as you can, it's just, am I being told the truth here? Just go on the evidence. Don't go on what you're being told. One of the things it took me a long time to learn is don't go on what you're being told. Just go on the evidence. One person I worked with, one of the nicest people I've ever worked with, kept saying, he'll be right, Keith, he'll be right. No, honestly, he'll be ready Wednesday. No, he'll be ready Thursday. No, you aren't going to believe what's happened. He'll be ready Monday. And I really liked the guy. Socialised with the guys, one of the nicest guys I ever met. And then suddenly these donkey ears kept growing out of my head. And I thought, hang on a minute, I'm just going to go on the evidence in future. If it's not on Wednesday, I want to know why. Why is it not there? Funnily enough, this is unemotional. You don't need to, like a person or dislike. You just go on the facts. It's going to be ready Wednesday. Let's have a look at it. It's either on time and it's good, or one of those is missing. This is what I'm saying about the frequent deliveries, frequent delivery of products, frequent delivery of stuff. It's what keeps you in control. So what I'm trying to say is when you're offshore, go time boxing crazy, time box everything. Keep these short packages of work, what you're expecting every 2 weeks. And the companies I'm dealing with that are getting this right, and they're in sprint 32, and they've got almost a sausage machine mentality, they've suddenly got themselves control. They know they're 10 days away from moment of truth. But the clever ones build interim deliverables in. And this is what I'm saying about frequent deliveries. It's the interim deliveries that you don't get this sort of surprise. Some of the best work I've done recently was out in America and with a very big digital media company that does things like websites for the big cars. I won't mention which cars it is, but the very big famous mass-produced cars they build websites for. Now these websites are extremely expensive because it involves a whole marketing campaign, the whole works, video, branding, the whole sort of stuff. And they are incredibly good at what they do, and they've got high caliber people, real perfectionists. But what they like doing is something called the big reveal, and it's their term, the big reveal. And at the end of sort of 3 months, the big reveal, when they sit in front of the customers and go, ta-da! And the customers sometimes go, don't like it. And what they don't like doing is the mini reveal, the half-baked version, the drawing that's not so good, and yeah, I'm sure we could sort the artwork out a bit better. But funnily enough, this is what you need to do. So culturally, think about yourself. Do you like going for the big reveal that works? Do you feel uncomfortable with these mini reveals? Because really what I'm saying is frequent delivery of stuff. Is it going in the right direction? Little by little, that's the way to stay in control when you're distributed. Now remember, if you're all in the same room, you can sort of wave something across to someone and they hear what you're saying. They know that it's only a sort of an interim deliverable, it's a rough and ready thing. But as I say, from the bigger picture, this is one of these things that's going to give you control. Because one thing we want to do if we're working this way, and this is one of the things I really love about Agile, is this idea of forcing fast failure. If you're going to fail, fail fast. Now remember, as you're going around the office tomorrow or whatever, please don't go, this guy called Keith Richards said failing fast is good news. Failing fast is good news if you are going to fail. And this is why these frequent deliveries suddenly get you to understand, where you are. It's like run rate in cricket. It was very easy to use that analogy out in India with the cricket, where they've only got about 10 channels showing cricket. But this idea of failing fast is really important. Another thing about Agile and distributed, and this is, again, just experience, and a lot of the times I'm problem solving with big companies, and some of the problems I'm trying to solve just aren't Agile. They're sometimes project management basics. I'm not going to say common sense, because it's very easy to say that, but sometimes things that need solving are just not necessarily an Agile thing. Let's take user stories, for example. How many people here are okay with the term and use user stories in the room here? Right, that's got to be close to sort of 3/4, maybe 80% saying user stories. Now, standard Agile technique, it's become famous with Agile. A little bit of a myth behind it. It's actually just a way of writing requirements. I think they're quite good. I advocate them. I think they're very good, giving you a syntax. But what gets sort of missed in this sort of Agile wave is you've actually got to write good user stories. You've actually got to put some good information into them. It's no good saying, I've got an index card, here's a user story, we're all sorted. My favourite user story, and this is true, this was out in Pune in India. I won't say which company it is, because I've been to several out there, so you can't, don't overguess this. But I was sitting in a room with 15 Indian software developers, and they were having trouble with user stories. So they got me in and they said, Keith, and they got a great big screen up on the wall, and they said, we're struggling here. Can you tell us, here's a user story, what do you think of it? Now the user story that was up on the wall, and this is honest truth, exactly as it was written, was, as a branch manager, I want to manage the branch so the branch is managed effectively. Now, they looked at me and said, what do you think of that? And I didn't know what to say, because I thought, And I goes, well, what do you think of it? Which I don't normally do, that's a cop-out, but that's my facilitation training cutting in there. And they said, we think it's rubbish. And I go, you're absolutely right. It'd be very difficult to code from that, one feels. So key thing about this is Agile's got its limits. You know, hey, we've got user stories, they're all in Jira, we're loving it. You've still got to do the work. If your BA isn't very good at, you know, capturing requirements, you know, you're in trouble. This is why someone said to me the other day, it was only recent actually, someone said, oh, well, we're not using Agile because we've got use cases along with the user stories. And I go, what's wrong with that? Well, why does that mean you're not Agile? If you've got use cases, process maps, it really doesn't matter. In fact, if you can back up your user stories with documentation, it's going to make it a bit more easy to understand. Because a user stories, the literal definition, if you like, or the, I don't know, the dictionary definition is a token for a conversation. Now, I don't particularly like that sort of language, but it just means it's a starting point for a conversation. That is what a user story is. It is not a defined requirement that you can now go and start coding up or building. So remember, all these things have got their limitations. Scrum. Very interesting thing about Scrum. It's been around for a long time, and it's brilliant at what it does. It's very good at product delivery, but there is a lot of hype surrounding Scrum. A lot of people think you can manage a project with Scrum. Well, you can't. The reason you can't is because most of the things you need to manage a project aren't in Scrum. You can deliver product with Scrum, you can build things with Scrum, and it's very good at that, but you can't manage a project with Scrum. Now, some of you in the room are going to be going, are you sure about that? And some are nodding at me going, yeah, I know that now. But I go into some organisations, like, this isn't backwater stuff, this is organisations in the last sort of 2 months where I'm going in and I'm finding they're using a method called Agile Scrum. And that's what they're doing everything with, Agile Scrum. And you're thinking, hang on, you know, Scrum is Agile, but Agile isn't Scrum. Do you know that yet? And they're going, what do you mean? I'm not sure what you're talking about. So be very careful with this Scrum thing. It's very good at certain things, and it's not built for others. It really is not built for managing a project. Can you use Scrum on a project? Yes, absolutely. But is it a management technique for a project? No. Questions there?
Yeah, I think you mentioned about a Scrum fall. I think that's where it comes. So a Scrum fall people use this to manage the project because project management is more about waterfall, you know.
Yep.
Plan and then you start delivering. And then you use the waterfall in the start and then you start using the Scrum in the execution of things like that. And then you use the Scrum fall as the top.
Okay, so the thing is, though, there's no aspect in the middle. And the funny thing, because I've done a lot of Prince training in the past. I was a Prince trainer for 10 years. And I always love the bit when you come to actually make something in Prince. So you spend, on a 3-day foundation course, you spend 2 days talking about starting up the project. You then get to the bit when you're actually going to create something. And that bit of the course lasted something like 10 minutes. It goes, oh, and then you go and build it. Anyway, let's go on with Prince now. And now we close down the project. So hang on, well, can we go back a bit? Where was the build bit? How do we build it? And this is where with Scrum, in terms of product delivery, and remember, even Scrum doesn't build it. It's only a delivery mechanism for actually the process of building. You know, the idea of sprints and things like the daily stand-ups. And so this is what I'm saying about Agile's got its limitations. You know, don't think, hey, we're going distributed Agile, let's use Scrum. Well, you know, if the guys in India are munching through, say, code with Scrum, that's fine. But where's the business case? Where's the architecture roadmap? Where's the testing strategy? Where's the, I don't know, alignment to strategic goals, product roadmaps, program stuff? Where's all that happening? Because it ain't happening in Scrum. Now, let's be clear, that's not a fault of Scrum. Scrum is very good at what it does. It's just, what are you going to wrap around it? And this is why I'm saying Agile has its limitations. Don't be seduced by what you sort of read and what you hear. Another really good example is the thing called the product owner. As long as you've got a product owner, life is going to be fantastic. Well, if there's a small team and you're all in the same room and the product owner is very clear about where they're going with the product, yeah, it works a treat. But when you've got, say, I don't know, analysts in America, and you've got project managers in the UK and developers in India and people doing whatever HTML and UX in Singapore, things get complicated. And this is where you've got bigger complex projects with different views from different people in the user community. I actually find that a single view from the user community is quite dangerous. 9 times out of 10, I want many views from the user community. I want high-level views, low-level views, peripheral views, and I want to munch all that in together and process it all to try and get and play back a view that everyone's going to be happy with. A single product owner, and remember, a single product owner on a complex project can canvass lots of opinions. They're probably a part-time business analyst. They might have a job to do as well. You know, this is getting tricky, and I'm not saying it won't ever work, but to be honest with you, I think I've seen about 4 in my entire life that are absolute what I call super product owners, like mega product owners. Most of the time I need to build a sort of a group of stakeholders to give me a very clear view of what the business or customer is saying. Question, sir?
You can think of a product owner as a role rather than as a person.
No, I could buy that, as in, if I see product owner as a role and I create some sort of team or something or a view, I'm okay with that concept. But the product owner, one person, and it's, you know, it's Sally, I'm okay with that as long as it's small and we're not talking anything involving double figures. Complex projects have multiple views of the user community or the business or the customer, and I want to canvass those opinions. Okay? So, how do you get the detailed view? How do you get the wider view? Now, another important thing, and again, this is one of these things about Agile, is getting off to a really good start. A lot of people have this fantastic moment. I don't know if anybody's ever taken the time to watch Scrum in 10 minutes on YouTube. Brilliant line right at the beginning. It says, let's start right at the beginning with the backlog. Now, as soon as I saw that, being an anorak, I paused the video and said, where did the backlog come from then? Did you come in on a Monday morning and you sort of, oh, crikey, there's a backlog on the wall. Right, let's Scrum, let's go off, you know, love it, let's prioritise. Where did it come from? And you'd be amazed how many projects don't actually get off to a good start. And they're up and running and they're not quite sure what it is, but let's get some post-it notes on the wall. Let's get the whiteboard going. Let's have the, I don't know, the penguin of shame if we get things wrong, whatever. Let's use all these techniques. But actually, getting a project off to a good start will solve an awful lot of your problems. And in distributed Agile particularly, because we need to know where we're going. Very quick question. I've done this a few times, and I don't know how to work tonight, but we'll try it. If I gave you a post-it note, and I always hold up a post-it note at this point, and I'm sure some of you are going, I know what a post-it note is, Kate. But if I gave you a post-it note and a thick marker pen, this is the important bit, a thick marker pen, how many of you in the room here, so put your hand up if it is you, put your hand up if you could write the reason for the project that you're working on at the moment on that post-it note. So in other words, could you be very brief in less than, say, 10 words and write down the reason for the project on that post-it note? Put your hand up if that's you. Right. Now, the fact is, that's a quarter of the room, okay? Now, I'm sure some of you are going, well, I work in the program office and I'm a freelance consultant working on 15 projects and I can't do that. But by and large, a quarter of the room's put their hand up, okay? Now, those that put their hands up, can you put your hands up again? I want to try something else. I'm not going to get you to do anything. Don't worry, you're comfortable. Now, if I gave a post-it note to the rest of the people in the team that you're working with and asked them to write down the reason for the project, keep your hand up if they'd write the same as you. I've got one left. You get an award. You get a free cup of coffee at the end of the session. Right. Yeah? Oh, you put yours up, did you? Oh, you're probably getting tired. You think, crikey, Keith, I'm getting bored of this. So put your hand up. But seriously, we got a room here. We're talking about 1% of the room here can say that. And this is what I'm saying. If you don't know where you're going exactly to a point of, you know, words of almost like one syllable. And at KLC, we train this. We call it the post-it note test. And unfortunately, it creates a lot of problems because people then go back to the office and go, why are we working on this project, by the way? Isn't it because of this? Aren't we reducing costs? No, we're actually improving sales. And no, I thought it was reducing the quality defects. No, it's actually improving time to market. And you have all of those conversations. If anyone here is working on a project where the mission statement or the project vision is something on the lines of, we want to create a seamless customer experience that's highly efficient and effective, involving, you know, less cost, higher quality. If you've got a big, you know, 2 paragraphs at the top of your project brief, you know, you're in trouble, okay? You need a single line. I'll let you have a line and a half in bold type, you know, why are we doing this? Try this when you get back to work tomorrow, and just put your crash helmet on. It might be a bit of fun. But everyone needs to get off to a good start. You need well-written project objectives, well-written requirements. Remember what I said about the user stories. The business analyst doesn't actually get much of a mention in Agile. Really doesn't get much of a mention. And I'm really surprised, because I think they're the sort of unsung heroes in Agile. I know we're here in a very much, a lot of this is project management context. Anyone here a business analyst at all, BA? Trust me, you are some of the most important people in the Agile sphere, because if you're writing poor requirements, then particularly in an offshore situation, you know, the Indian guys are going to build it perfectly for you. They're going to build, you know, something really well that you actually don't want. But that's not their fault, okay? So go careful. Prioritization is really important. There's lots of techniques around, just straightforward 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but also things like Moscow prioritization, because this is going to get you in on time. But again, knowing your requirements and writing them well is very, very important. Here's a really important line that I quite like, and that is, and funnily enough, it comes from a guy. Has anyone heard of somebody called Steve McConnell? We're going back, don't put your hand up if you don't want to, because we're going back a long way. We're going back to something like 70s, 80s. But he came up with this superb line. If you want to go fast, you know, go slow early on to go fast later. And this is why what I see a lot with offshore is we've got an offshore capability, they're ramped up, they're ready to go, and we're not quite ready to start. Well, let's start anyway. Let's go and get going on something. Now, trust me, that is just a really bad way of using time and resources, because you're going to go very quickly into not a good place, okay? Don't panic, you know, hang back. Wait till you know where you're going. So, number 7 is not that exciting as one of these things, but unfortunately it's very, very important, because again, this is what I'm noticing, is what actually is your tooling like? If we're in an IT situation, you know, where's the code kept? Can we deliver into the code from the UK and India? Can we add to it? Have we got some of these things? And again, this is very IT specific, this point, but TDD, test-driven development, and CI, continuous integration, have you got that option? And how quickly can you do it? You know, can people put things in overnight and you come in and find it in the morning? So these are really important if you're trying to get agile, you're trying to deliver quickly. And away from the code, you know, what sort of stuff have you got that can help you with things like collaboration, communication, you know, managing the project? Remember, if you've got a situation where, you know, a team is using a whiteboard, it's very difficult to get that across, that information across, if you're, you know, in different continents. So what sort of stuff are you using there? What is your environment like? Some companies I work with on simple non-distributed projects in the UK, you know, don't have a very good working environment. There's 2 or 3 companies I work with that you can't, seriously, you can't stick anything on the wall. Either because the landlord won't have it, or they quite like the look and feel of the thing and the nice pictures of ships and countryside or whatever. And you sit there starting to talk about, can I put a burn down chart on the wall? And no. Yet, fundamental to Agile, things like Kanban, Scrum, visualization, the idea of getting things on the wall and getting it visual is almost second nature now for Agile. So if your environment says, nope. And remember, a lot of technology isn't necessarily as good at getting information across as some sort of low-tech stuff. So go careful there. But don't over-engineer it. I think I saw a survey recently about the most commonly used tool for managing an Agile project. Anybody guess what it is? Excel. Correct, it's Excel. And it was a long way the winner, okay? And then 4 or 5 at a big, you know. In fact, it must be hilarious if you are working for those big companies. I won't mention who they are, but it must be terrible to sit there going, we have just built a £1 million company here, and Excel beats us. But the truth is that, you know, Excel keeps it simple, if you like. Don't get me wrong, it has limitations, but you'll be amazed how far you can go with something pretty simple. Keep it simple. In fact, I've been doing this long enough to know that most people I meet think Microsoft PowerPoint is better than Microsoft Project for actually running a project, and I've got some sympathy with that coming. But one big thing here, don't ever let the tools drive your process. Come up with your process and let your tools fit in with that. Don't, whatever you do, type in Agile project management tools and then go and buy a load of stuff. You'll find that not a good place to start. Have a look at what you got, build your process, look at where the gaps are, because your gap could be, for example, just collaboration. Your comms could be good, your requirements tooling could be good, it's just your collaboration isn't. So look at where your gaps are. And a final one, number 8, and this is a very interesting one, this one, because maybe I want to challenge some of your thinking here, and this is what I call always inspect and adapt. And do this if you like relentlessly. I don't know if anyone's into Formula 1. I quite like Formula 1, very much into it. You've got the 2 Red Bull cars there, and I think Formula 1 is a fantastic example of this relentless inspect and adapt. Anytime anything happens, if they can save, 1,000th of a second, that they will do it. I was coming here on the tube tonight, and did anyone pick up the newspaper and they showed you the new bicycle? I don't know if you can call them bicycle. It's probably called a bike, but the new bicycle that Sky are going to be using for their races. They've just spent everything to try and take tenths and hundredths of seconds out of things just to improve it, because lots of little improvements build up. And this is where I'm saying this idea of inspect and adapt is very much out of the heart of your Kaizen and your Kanban and some of the stuff that's come over on the lean ticket that's grown into Agile. Little by little hone the process. Now, I'm not a very good cook, not a good cook at all. I often think a lot of cooking is a little bit natural, and I just don't have those skills. But one thing I can do really well is make roast potatoes, okay? Now, I don't want to sound big-headed, but they are fantastic roast potatoes. There really is no doubt about it. And the only reason they're brilliant is I've spent 2 years perfecting the roast potato, and this involves, the weight of the potato and the boiling time and the cooking time, and just everything is spent ages. And it's exactly this inspect and adapt that is just honing the process. The family are a bit annoyed when you have to spend, Sunday doing a little bit of a retrospective and things like that, and we go through the potato review, but they've got used to it. And as you can start to go through and evolve this stuff. But the same thing with, if you like, my roast potatoes applies to your process about how you work. Look at every single thing that happens. The classic is a mistake or a misunderstanding. It's now a reflex for me. I don't go and search for the innocent. I just go, right, we've got a problem. What caused it? Can we get to the root cause of it? Can we put something in place that makes sure it doesn't happen again? But if you could get into this relentlessly, I think you'll find in your distributed context, I think you'll find it incredibly powerful. Every miscommunication, every problem, every error, everything that goes wrong, just go, right, what caused it? Let's get to the root of the cause. And let's try and change it. Is it a process problem? Because I'd say to you that, 49 times out of 50, it's a process problem. It is not people being incompetent or don't care. In fact, everyone's trying 100%. It's just, it's the process. What can we put in? Now, don't mistake that for putting in loads of checklists and documents. I'm just trying to say, what caused it? How can we have learned from it? Now, I run a business, and we do the same thing. Anytime anything goes wrong, and I don't like saying we make mistakes, but we do. We just try not to make too many. But when we do, we take it on the chin and we go, right, guys, what can we do? One thing we don't do is just get a load of documentation out. We just look at what can we do differently to solve it. But this is where it doesn't matter if it's F1 or your process working offshore. Have a look at it. What caused the problem? Root cause analysis. And I say root cause. Try and find out where it is. Now, what were you taught to do with the word retrospective? How many people here do retrospectives in terms of a 2-week Scrum type concept? I'd say that's about a quarter of the room or a third of the room. The important thing about the retrospective is purely to look at your process. It's not to look at anything else. It's to say, what have we learned in the last 2 weeks? But what I'd say to you is to try to get real time with this. Don't see it as a 2-week opportunity. Do it every day. Anything happens, just immediately go into root cause mode. What caused it? Admittedly, you don't want to spend 90% of your time, honing the process. It'd be nice if you got them some work. But if you listen to some of the studies in terms of the Japanese motor manufacturer about how they've gone about it, some of the stories are incredible about how often they would stop the process to improve it. And what they actually then did for car manufacturing in the 80s and 90s is now, if you like, folklore. But they only did it through inspect and adapt and the idea of improving their process. And the bit I would leave with, sort of a thought I would leave with you, only because I've been doing this for a long time, is when I come to Agile in the early days, a lot of it I thought was about, collaboration, communication, and trying to get that to work as well as it could. But as time sort of grew, I suddenly realized that, yeah, they're important. But actually, there's some really big things that are almost hidden. But they're so massive, they're sort of all pervasive. And I think this idea of inspect and adapt is one of those. I'm being a bit theoretical here, so I don't really mean this, but if you only ever did one thing, let's say you threw away all your processes and all your templates and everything, and just said, I'm just going to inspect and adapt all the time. Anything that happens, I'm going to look at it, I'm going to see how we can improve it. And I'm going to, it's sort of cause and effect. If I could do that all the time, you would in effect build your own processes. It's almost like how things are invented. It's a very lean startup model, if you like, but this idea of inspect and adapt, I think, is bigger than you might imagine. And I'm trying to share with you, if you like, a lot of experience that I suddenly realised what I call the big ticket items are. And this is why I think this one might be something that actually might solve a lot of your problems if you just focused some time on it. Again, trying to be a little bit controversial there, or not too theoretical, because I deal with groups, and every time you say, what's the most important? I go, communication, collaboration, and then you go, what about inspect and adapt? And they go, nah, I'm not really bothered about that, to be honest. Funnily enough, when you speak to them 5 or 10 years later, they've got a different view on it. And as I say, quite powerful stuff. So, is that the heart of Agile? In my opinion, probably, but as I say, I'll just leave that thought. When you're going home tonight on the tube, you'll be going, well, you might be going, those teacups annoyed me on inspect and adapt, but never mind. Right, we've just got to the end there. So in summary, they're the 8 things. Teamwork and collaboration is actually the big one for me in terms of what I've found out from my experiences. Get into communication, the back and forward, it just gets visibility, transparency. But again, the cadence of frequent deliveries ensures we've got moments of truth. If people are saying it's going fine, yeah, but we're going to have a moment of truth pretty soon, so let's have a look. Be aware that Agile just has limits. Quite simply, Agile in a distributed context has limits. There are things it can't do. So be very careful. Don't try and hang everything on this sort of Agile hook. Get off to a good start. I can't stress how important that is. I think good projects have good starts. A lot of people, when they get into a mess, and then they blame the customer or the business, and they call it scope creep. It's not scope creep. It's just called you didn't know what you were doing when you set off. And trust me, I see that so often. I wouldn't major on that if I hadn't. Your tools, you could have everything going for you in your Agile context, but if your environment and your tools just don't help you, you're sort of working with one hand tied behind your back. And as I say, just remember that inspect and adapt thing at the end there. Now, very tiny commercial, and then we'll get straight to the questions. If you want the slides from this thing, they're on the BCS website, they're on the PMI website, and they're on our website as well. I've done this one before, so it's actually on there. We've got a webinar. We do a lot of webinars. Is there anyone in the room here who actually hears any KRC webinars at all? Has anyone seen a few? I've got about 4 or 5 hands there. And there's a load of about a dozen webinars you can download. If you want to stick that onto your iPhone or iPod or whatever and listen to it on the tube, that's fine. And as I say, we do loads of stuff on Agile, lots of free downloads. I have actually written a 6,000 word white paper if you're having trouble sleeping at night and you want to have a look at that. And that's downloadable as well. Again, I'm not going to hit you with loads of commercials. Just go to our website, Agile KRC, if you want to know any more on that one at all. We've got an Agile training course coming up, I think. In fact, the one that's coming up is actually just booked up, actually, so we've got one in July. But what I'd like to do now is maybe take questions for maybe 10 minutes and then take a break. Does that sound okay? So anybody got any questions at all about, in fact, what I'll do, if I just get the list up there. Anybody got any questions on distributed Agile? And I'm going to take a drink if you don't mind. So,
I think I have a question not necessarily on distributed agile, but on the agile itself. I think a lot of the time we focus on coding or the developer itself, but not much on QA. I think sometimes you may have a product which is quite complex and may need different kind of testing, and we don't really focus how the QA can adapt to Scrum or Agile. Most of the time we just focus on developers and coding. And I think for developers it's easy to adopt Scrum and things, but not for QA. And I think that's where we struggle, I think.
okay, so the question there is about agile struggles, if you like, with QA, testing, quality assurance, and the short answer is I agree with you entirely. But this is why I think if you look at the point there, number 5, agile's got limitations. There's a lot of good stuff in, say, Scrum, and Scrum is by far the most popular agile approach. There's a lot of good stuff in Scrum about definition of done, is it done, have we finished it? But what I don't believe there is in Scrum, and it's not a failing of Scrum, it's just not in there, is something that you might call QA strategy or testing strategy, or at the beginning of a project, spending a bit of time saying, how do we ensure that that this is going to be tested correctly from a business perspective, a technical perspective. I mean, if you take Prince 2, for example, and you have something called a quality plan or a quality strategy, you do it up front. Are we going to give this to a third party? Are we going to test it in-house? Are we going to have to get the business to give up 2 days a week of their time? You have to think these things before you've even started building anything or writing a line of code. And I think, again, this is an example of, hey, let's pile into Agile, we'll sort it out. I think it's only in the last 10 days, I think somebody said something on the lines of, yeah, well, we're using Scrum and there isn't a testing strategy in Scrum, is there? And I think the inference is, therefore, we don't need one. Well, you don't need one if there's a very small team and you can handle it with definition of done and you can evolve things. But if you're working on a project with 20, 30 people, it's distributed. How are we testing this, guys? It's an absolute must, in my opinion. And that's what I call, good upfront work and due diligence. So I would agree with you there. Okay, I've got a question at the back there. And yeah, just shout, or if you've got a mic or anything, just go for it, and I'll play it back.
From a project management perspective, do you find that the Agile and Scrum approach helps you with managing your project risks?
So the question there is, does project management and Scrum help you with managing your risks? Again, in Scrum, there is no risk log, there is no sort of risk analysis up front. But again, this isn't because Scrum's got any weaknesses. Scrum is a delivery mechanism. And this is why I tend to try to get teams to, just look at basic risk management, risk analysis, risk management. This is why up front, I would do an upfront risk assessment of the delivery mechanism. When you're doing distributed, you need to do a risk assessment, a risk analysis of how how this is actually going to work. So it's not a word you hear a lot of, and if you do wrap it in more traditional project management framework sort of apparatus, for want of a better word, you've got your risk log, your project manager is going to be good at risk. I always say that you can tell a good project manager by whether they're a good risk manager. The project manager who's a bit of a firefighter that's running around late at work, with 2 phones to his or her ears, they might look good, but it's the project manager that's gone home at 5 o'clock because they're very good at risk management that's actually worth their weight in gold. So I would say Agile is a bit light on that in the sort of delivery techniques like Scrum. Therefore, you need to put your apparatus around it and manage risk appropriately. And this is where I think good old-fashioned project management approaches, bring something to the Agile party. If you're working UK, India, there's more risks, if you like, in many respects that you need to manage. And you reminded me of one company I worked with where I won't say who it was a city council, and I was in a room working with them, and I said, look, you guys, how are you handling risk at the moment? What do you do from a point of view of risk, risk management and risk analysis? And I'm not kidding, the answer came back, well, the culture here is very much a can-do culture. I don't know whether it was a Labour and a left-wing council was relevant here, but it's a very can-do culture here, and the senior management don't like us talking and thinking about things that might go wrong. And I said, you're joking, aren't you? They goes, oh, no, we don't, you know, risk analysis and that, we don't really go into that because it's just seen as negative thinking. And I thought, well, I admire the positive thinking stuff, but for crying out loud, could you start managing risks on your project? Because you're gonna find yourself in a bit of a pain. You know, risk is a very important thing. For those that are advanced in Agile, you could say it's, if you like, some people call it negative value. There's a lot of talk in Agile about value and delivering stuff of value. Risks hit your projects and in effect create, you know, stuff that's going to hold your sort of value back. So simple answer to me is Agile doesn't talk about it much. Project management does, and I would err to the side of project management if you want your Agile to scale. Make sure you do it. I just want to check there's no other ones. Any other questions at the moment? I'll go with this gentleman here first, okay?
What's your experience been with Scaled Agile Framework?
Right, SAFE, or the Scaled Agile Framework, which is sort of Dean Leffingwell's creation. It's very early doors on that, to be honest. It's very early days. A lot of people are rushing into this and going, oh, this could be the next big thing. And there's a lot of people criticising it very heavily, saying it's a load of nonsense. Most of those people criticising it heavily actually are selling other products. So it's very, very hard to get neutral opinions. Either you've got, you know, people trying to sell it, trainers trying to promote themselves. It's really, really tricky. It's very early days. The Scaled Agile Framework, or SAFE. The two things, my observations, are very simple. Number one, for me, it's for what I would call big IT. I think if you're a big bank and you've got loads and loads of systems, I think that there's going to be some benefits of this sort of conveyor belt way of working. I've had a couple of conversations and with Dean Leffingwell, and he's quite forthcoming and on various things. And I sort of talked about the project concept, and to me, it's not in there. The idea of a complicated piece of work that's a project, it's not in there. But he's not saying, you know, it's excluded. It would go in onto the conveyor belt. You would treat it as a project. So it's not getting rid of projects and project managers. And the other thing that's slightly, I think, is a drawback on it is it doesn't really work for me in what I would call a customer-supplier situation. If I take some of the digital media companies I'm working with and they're working with a customer, you know, they can't really use SAFE because, you know, neither of them have got it at the moment. And so I think there's limitations. But I think for big Agile, I think there's a big body of knowledge in it that I think is quite useful. Where it goes, because it is quite big and it's a little bit too generic in places, I'm not sure. But it's only really, say, UK, I think we're only probably about 9 months into it at the moment. Ask me in 2 years' time. I think it's got its place, but I think it's what I call big Agile. And one big limitation with it is it's IT only. It really isn't for a wider piece. I mean, I'm working with engineering companies, hardware and software, and I always cite these digital media companies that are quite good examples. You know, there's a marketing element, a branding element, an IT element. There's loads of elements, and this is where, and to all of you, when you're looking at your Agile, is your Agile software development, or is it the bigger Agile, you know, Agile business change? And that's something I'd get you to all look at when you're reviewing things. Sir, I've got 2 more questions and I'll go with
It's just maybe more generic one. I mean, in terms of Agile projects, how have you seen the role of the project manager change from a traditional command and control type?
Sorry to all the others who asked questions. That's a brilliant question because it really is the hot topic at the moment. And the first thing to say is there's a lot of people in the Agile community, I would say 10, 15, 20%, maybe growing, that said we do not need project managers anymore. They're done, they're extinct, because everything's about product now. Well, I don't agree. I 100% don't agree. If you've got an existing product and a big backlog, yeah, I think a project manager might be an irritation. But if you're trying to do something complicated that needs a lot of people coming together to a business case, to a finite endpoint, you're going to need a project manager, okay? The problem is often with scale. I think if you've got a small team and it's sort of 4 or 5, yeah, we don't need a project manager. Let's just have a team leader and get on with it. Once you start to have a business change element, a marketing element, you know, 2 IT elements, once you start to get a lot of things you've got to pull together, you're going to need a project manager. So I think this agile concept that we're getting rid of a project manager or there's no such thing as a project, I really don't agree with. And one person I had quite a long, I do respect the guy tremendously in terms of his agile knowledge, but we had a long debate about this, the fact that in one place he'd got rid of the project managers. And I just went through and said, well, who's handling risks at project level? Who's reporting up to the steering committee? Who's divvying up the work between the things? Who's called? And I went through this list, and they kept saying, "Oh, the product manager is." Now, I said, "Okay." And at the end of this, I said, "Well, my opinion is you've just renamed a project manager. Now, you can rename a project manager to Chief Banana. I really don't mind, but if you've got a complex piece of work, someone's got to pull it together." Now, the next bit, can I just finish it? Honestly, one more point. So the reason why your question was so powerful was because you mentioned the command and control expression. Now this, I find, as soon as you say leader, project manager, someone assumes, command and control. But I think that's a stereotype. I think the best project managers are facilitative. The Scrum always sort of promotes the idea of servant leader. You can be facilitative, you can be an equal, you can do it any way you want. I think command and control is a stereotype. I definitely believe in self-organising. I definitely do not believe in self-directing, because I think that's anarchy. But if a team organises itself, but you need someone who's accountable. And I don't mean the old sort of throat to choke type scenario. I mean, who is accountable? And this is why I think the truth is a project manager who is facilitative, collaborative, that's the sort you want. Command and control, I work with a lot of the MOD type projects. I've worked with them for ages, and when you're in Afghanistan, you don't, you're on a corner of a building and you're in a crisis situation, you don't need a focus group, okay? You want command and control, do this, you want your training to cut in. So I think command and control has its place. But I think in Agile, that stereotype isn't useful, but the sort of we all share this together sort of stuff, I think is limited, because I think when things go wrong, I don't think human beings share collective defeat. They don't go, yes, we all failed and we all contributed to that failure equally. They tend to go, it's the business analyst messed up. And this is why I'm thinking, the command and control is a bit of a stereotype, so go careful there. I just want to get 2 or 3 more in. Do you want to add a final bit there, sir?
No, other than I just think there's a question of the role of the project manager and the responsibilities. I never thought the responsibilities went away. It's just how that gets executed on a project, I think.
Now, I think this is where the big word's collaboration. I think it's the management style. Right, a question over there, I believe, if you've still got it.
Yeah. I would like to ask you something about knowledge management, because I know that's something which is even very hard to manage and to retain the knowledge if you're working in the same location. So I was just wondering, what were your observational tips in terms of trying to manage that knowledge or capture and distribute knowledge within the projects which are managed by distributed teams, whether this is the distribution, locally or internationally? I would imagine that would be quite hard to capture.
No, you're right. And this is where, if you look at number 8, the inspect and adapt, I think the stuff you're saying there is quite powerful, because the more we share, the more we can inspect and adapt. And the more we say, look, this is what I did wrong on my project, and we can learn from it. One tip I would give you is, I think if you leave it passive, if you leave it on the wiki or on SharePoint or whatever, I think it tends to, just become sort of shelfware. I would try and find people who can move that information around. And the first place I would go would be to the PMO, the project management office, or whatever you call them, but some sort of central project support unit, and put them in charge of that knowledge management and disseminating that information around, and make that one of their primary responsibilities. Because it's like all these cookery programs you watch, that is just sharing knowledge. And I'm happy to share with you that, one brilliant bit for roast potatoes is to use semolina when you're doing your roast potatoes. Who uses semolina with the roast potatoes? Right, we're going to call that 0 then, right? That's the only time I've got 0 hands tonight. So, but I wonder how many of you are going to try that within a week? No. You're allergic to semolina? Right, inspect and adapt then. So sorry about that. So, but that's a fair point, and I'll be getting some serious feedback from you if you ate my roast potato. So I'll make sure that's clear. But seriously, that sort of learning, share it around. I think that's a really powerful point. You know, how you move the information around. Right, so I'm going to take one more question. Final question.
My question was just leading from this gentleman's. You talked about BAs being the unsung heroes in agile projects.
Yep.
Could you just give us a brief vision on how you see a good BA working in an agile project?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of things go on in a project, and funnily enough, you know, the requirements, how good your requirements are, is a really big moment. Garbage in, garbage out. You know, poor requirements. You know, the techies then have to spend all their time flushing it out. In the really shortest answer I can give you is what I call act like a Furby. Do you happen to know what a Furby is, by any chance? Yeah, it's a little thing. Can anybody tell me the biggest attributes of a Furby? Why do I say act like a Furby? Pardon? No, it's not the furry bit. You don't get anywhere being a furry business analyst. Any attributes of a Furby? It's what? No, I tell you what, I'll get back to that. It's got big ears, big eyes, and a small mouth. Okay? Now, if you want to be a really good BA on an Agile, yeah, talk back to clarify, but the less you talk, the more you learn. And if you can keep, you know, the old 5-year-old, you know, keep saying why. If you're a BA and just listen and listen and go, why is that then? Why is that then? Suddenly you drill out these requirements. Because my experience is it's very rare, no, sorry, not very rare, it's rare that the business community can write down really good requirements. They know what they want, and they can talk, you know, the hind leg off a donkey, and they can tell you what they want from that. But if someone could listen to it, distill it, get what the requirement really is, not what the solution is. You know, I want a pull-down list box that does this. I want an email. No, hang on, they're solutions. What's your problem? What are you trying to solve? If you could solve what their problem is and write them down in very clear terms, which takes time and patience and a Furby principle, then I think you add an awful lot of power to your actual projects. Okay?
Requirements, anything that's testable.
Yeah, how do I test it?
A requirement that's not testable, it's not a requirement.
Okay, so something like, you know, again, if you can't test it, that's why in a user story, one of the best bits is actually the benefit bit at the end. As a role, I want to be able to function. They're the bits that are actually quite, they're actually relatively easy. So that the next bit of your user story, when you have to write down the benefit, that's why, you know, when I'm sitting there with something saying, so the branch is managed effectively, how are you going to test that? You're not going to be able to. Right, guys, I tell you what, I'm going to have to finish now. I hope you've enjoyed listening. Nobody's run off and caught a train just yet. I'm going to be around for a few minutes, 10 or 15 minutes. I believe there's coffees outside. I've got some business cards down there if you want to take any, or if you want to have a chat, feel free, or give me a card if you want us to send you the slides. But other than that, thank you very much for your attention, and good night.